I sat at my childhood dinner table in the house I bought for my parents 3 years ago, listening to my mother praise my younger brother Danny for finally getting his life together by landing a part-time job at a local gym. When I mentioned I just got promoted to senior engineer with a significant raise, my mother dismissed it with a wave. Then, she delivered the crushing blow that would change everything between us forever. Danny has done more for us than you ever will, sweetie. He actually cares about family. I stared at the mortgage papers in my briefcase, realizing my 3 years of sacrifice meant absolutely nothing. That dinner represented the culmination of years of financial sacrifice that had slowly drained my bank account and reshaped my entire existence. 3 years earlier, when my parents faced foreclosure on their old house, due to my father's sudden job loss at the manufacturing plant where he had worked for nearly 2 decades, I made the biggest financial decision of my 25-year-old life. I liquidated my entire life savings account, took out a substantial personal loan that required me to pledge my car as collateral, and purchased this beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in Maplewood Heights, a neighborhood my parents had always dreamed of living in but never thought they could afford. Walking through the house after that devastating dinner, I remembered every detail of how I had furnished each room from scratch. The comfortable sectional sofa in the living room, where my father Frank now watched his evening news programs, the oak dining set where we had just shared what would become our last family meal together, the king-size bedroom suite I had selected for my parents' master bedroom, complete with the memory foam mattress my mother Linda needed for her chronic back problems. Every stick of furniture, every appliance, every decorative touch had come from my paychecks. The financial obligations extended far beyond the initial purchase price. I had covered the complete HVAC system replacement when the old unit failed during their first winter in the house. Property taxes that amounted to nearly $4,000 annually came directly from my checking account through automatic withdrawal. Monthly utility bills for electricity, gas, water, and trash service averaged another $350. I paid their car insurance premiums for both vehicles, maintained their health insurance supplemental coverage, and even covered their weekly grocery bills because I knew my father's unemployment benefits barely covered their prescription medications. My own living situation had become a stark contrast to the comfort I provided my family. I rented a cramped studio apartment in a converted basement, where the ceiling was so low I had to duck when walking through the bathroom doorway. My kitchen consisted of a hot plate, a mini refrigerator, and a microwave that I had purchased secondhand from a yard sale. While my parents enjoyed cable television with premium movie channels, I watched shows on my laptop using the apartment building's spotty wireless internet connection. My 10-year-old Honda Civic had over 200,000 miles on the odometer and needed constant repairs that I performed myself in the apartment complex parking lot using tools borrowed from other tenants. The driver's side window no longer rolled down completely. The air conditioning had stopped working 2 summers ago, and the radio only picked up AM stations on clear days. Meanwhile, my parents drove vehicles with current registration tags, comprehensive insurance coverage, and regular maintenance that I scheduled and paid for at the local dealership. Social invitations became sources of anxiety because I simply could not afford to participate in normal activities that people my age took for granted. Dinner at restaurants, weekend trips to nearby cities, concerts, sporting events. Even casual drinks after work became impossible expenses. I had learned to politely decline with vague excuses about being busy with projects or feeling under the weather rather than admitting that my monthly budget allowed for exactly $47 in discretionary spending after covering my own basic expenses and my family's complete household costs. My father, Frank, a proud man who had worked 40 years at the manufacturing plant before the company relocated operations overseas, initially resisted accepting such extensive help from his son. He would sit at the kitchen table with employment websites, open on his laptop applying for positions that seemed increasingly unlikely to materialize as months passed. His pride made him uncomfortable with the role reversal, but practical necessity eventually overcame his resistance. When he realized their savings account would last less than 6 months without my intervention. My mother Linda seemed grateful for the stability and security, but her attention always focused more intensely on Danny, who had dropped out of college twice and moved back home indefinitely. She worried constantly about his lack of direction, his inability to maintain steady employment, and his tendency to disappear for days at a time without explanation. Her maternal instincts drove her to protect and defend him even when his behavior clearly demonstrated irresponsibility and selfishness that affected the entire family dynamic. The climactic revelation that shattered my perception of the family situation came entirely by accident. I had stopped by the house after work to drop off groceries and heard Danny talking loudly on his phone in the basement recreation room. He was bragging to someone about how the parents think I am contributing to the house payments and laughing about how Ted is too much of a pushover to correct them when they give me credit for things he pays for. He described elaborate stories he had created about leaving anonymous cash gifts around the house, when in reality those mysterious 20s and 50s that appeared on the kitchen counter came directly from my wallet during my weekly visits. Danny had been systematically taking credit for my anonymous generosity while simultaneously portraying himself as a devoted son who quietly supported the family without seeking recognition or praise. The cruel irony was that I had deliberately made many of my contributions anonymous precisely because I wanted to avoid the appearance of showing off or making my parents feel indebted to me. Instead, my humility had created an opportunity for my brother to steal the credit and build a false narrative about his own character and contributions. Standing in that hallway listening to my brother mock my generosity while taking credit for it, I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of our family relationships. This was not simply a matter of miscommunication or misunderstanding. This was deliberate deception, designed to elevate Danny's status while diminishing mine, and it had been happening right under my nose for months, without my knowledge or awareness. The discovery of Danny's deception prompted me to investigate other situations where I suspected similar manipulation might have occurred. What I uncovered was a systematic pattern of credit theft that extended back several years and covered virtually every significant act of generosity I had performed for our family. The scope and deliberate nature of his deception left me feeling both betrayed and foolish for not recognizing the signs earlier. When their washing machine had broken 18 months earlier, flooding the laundry room and requiring immediate replacement to prevent water damage to the finished basement, I had purchased a new high-efficiency unit and arranged for same-day delivery and installation. To avoid making my parents feel uncomfortable about accepting such an expensive gift, I had the delivery team tell them the previous owner had left a credit at the appliance store that covered the full purchase price. Danny later told them he knew a guy who could get wholesale deals on appliances and took full credit for negotiating the arrangement. Their father's diabetes medication had become increasingly expensive when his health insurance changed formularies and dropped coverage for his preferred prescription. The monthly cost jumped from $35 to over $240, creating a significant strain on their limited budget. I secretly contacted the pharmacy and established a prepaid account that covered his medications for an entire year, instructing the pharmacist to tell my parents that a new patient assistance program had become available. Danny somehow learned about the arrangement and told them he had spent hours on the phone with pharmaceutical companies and insurance representatives to secure the financial assistance. When their roof developed leaks during a particularly harsh winter storm, I hired a contractor to perform emergency repairs and replace several damaged shingles to prevent water damage to the interior of the house. The bill totaled nearly $800, which I paid directly to avoid burdening my parents with the expense. Danny claimed he had negotiated with the contractor to perform the work in exchange for helping with other jobs, portraying himself as resourceful and hardworking rather than acknowledging that I had simply written a check to resolve the problem immediately. The pattern extended beyond financial contributions to include gifts, household improvements, and even basic maintenance tasks that I performed during my regular visits to their house. When I replaced their outdated smoke detectors with newer models that included carbon monoxide detection capabilities, Danny told them he had researched safety requirements and purchased the units during a sale. When I arranged for professional carpet cleaning to remove stains and refresh their living spaces, Danny claimed he had traded favors with someone in the cleaning business. My investigation led me to have a conversation with Mrs. Patterson, their next-door neighbor, who had lived on the street for over 15 years and maintained friendly relationships with most of the families in the area. She mentioned how wonderful it was that Danny had arranged for the house purchase and continued to take care of all the bills, ensuring his parents could live comfortably without financial stress. She praised his maturity and responsibility, noting how different he seemed from the troubled young man who had struggled with direction and stability in previous years. Mrs. Patterson's comments revealed the extent to which Danny had rewritten the narrative surrounding our family's situation. According to her understanding, Danny had somehow orchestrated the entire house purchase and assumed responsibility for ongoing expenses while I played a minimal supporting role. She seemed to believe that I occasionally helped with small tasks, but that Danny carried the primary burden of caring for our aging parents. The most devastating discovery came when I decided to check their mail delivery, something I had legitimate authority to do, as the actual homeowner whose name appeared on the deed and mortgage documents. In the garage, I found a cardboard box tucked behind holiday decorations that contained dozens of birthday cards, holiday greetings, and thank you notes that I had sent to my parents over the past 3 years. Each card contained heartfelt messages expressing my love for them and explaining various anonymous gifts I had provided. The birthday card I sent for my father's 60th celebration included a detailed note about how I had secretly arranged for his favorite restaurant to cater a surprise dinner, along with an explanation of why I had chosen to remain anonymous rather than seeking credit for the gesture. The Christmas cards contained information about gift certificates I had purchased for their favorite stores, movie theaters, and restaurants, always emphasizing that I wanted them to enjoy themselves without feeling obligated to reciprocate or express excessive gratitude. Every single card had been opened, read, and then discarded in this box rather than being shared with my parents. Danny had been intercepting their mail, removing anything that might reveal the true source of the kindness and generosity they experienced, and allowing them to continue believing that he was responsible for improving their quality of life. The cards represented hundreds of dollars worth of gifts and gestures that my parents never knew I had provided, along with emotional messages that expressed my feelings and motivations in ways I found difficult to communicate verbally. Reading through those discarded cards, I realized that my parents' perception of my character and level of care for them had been deliberately distorted by my brother's systematic deception. They had no idea that I regularly thought about their needs, planned special surprises for holidays and birthdays, and made significant financial sacrifices to ensure their comfort and security. Instead, they saw me as someone who occasionally contributed money but lacked the personal touch and emotional investment that Danny appeared to demonstrate through his fabricated stories and stolen credit. The emotional impact of discovering those cards exceeded even the financial betrayal because it revealed how thoroughly Danny had poisoned our family relationships through calculated lies and manipulation. He had not simply taken credit for my money, he had stolen my expressions of love and replaced them with a false narrative that portrayed him as the caring, attentive son, while reducing me to a distant, impersonal financial contributor who lacked genuine emotional connection to my family. After discovering the discarded cards and fully understanding the scope of Danny's deception, I decided to approach him directly. in hopes of resolving the situation through honest communication rather than confrontation. I still held on to the belief that family relationships could be repaired through understanding and that perhaps Danny's behavior stemmed from insecurity or fear rather than malicious intent. I found him in the finished basement recreation room that I had paid to complete during their second year in the house. The space featured professional carpeting, recessed lighting, a large screen television, and comfortable seating that had cost nearly $12,000 to create. Danny was sprawled across the leather sectional sofa, playing video games on the expensive gaming setup that I had purchased for his 24th birthday, complete with the latest console wireless controllers, surround sound speakers, and a collection of games that retailed for $60 each. I sat down in the adjacent recliner and waited for him to reach a stopping point in his game before beginning what I hoped would be a calm, productive conversation about our family situation. I explained how hurt I felt, discovering that he had been taking credit for my contributions, and asked him to help me understand his perspective on what had been happening between us. Danny's initial response caught me completely off guard with its casual indifference to my feelings and his matter-of-fact acknowledgement of his deceptive behavior. He paused. His game turned to face me with a slight smile and confirmed that he had indeed been deliberately undermining my relationship with our parents for several months. He described his actions as protecting the family from my obvious attempts to show off and make everyone else look inadequate through excessive generosity. According to Danny's twisted logic, my financial contributions were actually harmful to family dynamics because they created unrealistic expectations and made other family members feel inferior or guilty about their inability to provide similar support. He claimed that my generosity was really a form of manipulation designed to make me appear superior while highlighting everyone else's shortcomings and failures. He revealed that he had been actively working to convince our parents that my motivations were selfish and calculating rather than genuinely caring. In conversations with them, he portrayed my help as buying their love and creating emotional debt that would eventually be used to control their decisions and behavior. He suggested that real family members supported each other through emotional connection and personal sacrifice, rather than simply writing checks to solve problems. Danny showed me screenshots of text messages he had been sending to our parents over the past several months, filled with carefully crafted lies about my attitude and behavior. The messages painted me as someone who secretly resented helping the family and only continued providing support to maintain a facade of being the perfect son. According to these fabricated conversations, I regularly complained to coworkers about my ungrateful family and expressed frustration about being taken advantage of by people who contributed nothing while expecting everything. One particularly damaging series of messages claimed that I had been secretly investigating their spending habits and keeping detailed records of every dollar I provided because I planned to eventually demand repayment with interest. Another set of texts suggested that I had been bragging to friends about how much money I made compared to our father, and how easy it was for me to cover their expenses without making any real sacrifices. The most psychologically manipulative messages focused on my apparent resentment toward Danny, specifically with claims that I viewed him as a lazy burden who took advantage of our parents' kindness while contributing nothing meaningful to the household. These texts portrayed me as someone who wanted Danny to fail and who secretly hoped that he would be forced to move out so that I could have our parents' complete attention and gratitude. Danny explained his strategy with shocking clarity and complete lack of remorse. He had systematically been poisoning our parents' perception of my character by creating doubt about my motivations while simultaneously building himself up as the truly caring, selfless son who understood what family really meant. Every act of kindness I performed became evidence of manipulation in his narrative, while every credit he stole became proof of his own generosity and family loyalty. The most devastating aspect of his confession was his admission that he viewed our family relationships as a competition that he intended to win regardless of the cost to anyone else involved. He saw my success and stability as threats to his position as the favorite child and had decided that destroying my reputation was easier than actually improving his own behavior and contributions. When I asked him directly to tell our parents the truth about who had been paying their bills and providing their support, Danny laughed and explained that he had invested too much time and effort in his deception to abandon it now. He had become comfortable with the praise and appreciation he received for accomplishments that belonged to me, and he had no intention of giving up the admiration he had stolen through lies and manipulation. Danny revealed that he had been planning to eventually ask our parents to remove my name from the house deed and transfer full ownership to him as a reward for his supposed financial responsibility and family dedication. He believed that his campaign of character assassination had been successful enough that they would agree to such an arrangement without questioning his ability to maintain the property or continue making payments. The conversation ended with Danny making it clear that he viewed me as an obstacle to his plans rather than as a brother deserving of honesty and respect. He had no interest in repairing our relationship or acknowledging the harm his deception had caused. Instead, he warned me that any attempt to expose his lies would only make me look desperate and vindictive, further damaging my already compromised standing with our parents. Walking out of that basement room, I realized that I had been naive to believe that family loyalty and honest communication could resolve a situation built on deliberate deception and calculated manipulation. Danny had made a conscious choice to prioritize his own interests over family harmony, and he had demonstrated complete disregard for the financial sacrifices I had made and the emotional damage his lies had caused. Armed with concrete evidence of Danny's deception, including the intercepted cards and screenshots of his manipulative text messages, I requested a family meeting to clear the air and restore honest communication to our relationships. I believe that presenting factual proof would force everyone to confront the truth and begin the process of rebuilding trust based on reality rather than fabricated narratives. I arranged all my documentation in chronological order, including bank statements showing every payment I had made, receipts for major purchases and home improvements, and the collection of personal cards that Danny had hidden from our parents. I also prepared copies of mortgage documents, insurance policies, and utility accounts that clearly showed my name as the responsible party for all financial obligations related to their house and living expenses. The family meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon in the living room, where I had hoped to finally receive acknowledgement for my years of sacrifice and commitment to their well-being. Instead, the conversation became a devastating confrontation that revealed how completely Danny's manipulation had poisoned my parents' perception of my character and motivations. When I presented the bank statements showing 3 years of mortgage payments, property tax installments, utility bills, and insurance premiums, my parents examined the documents with skepticism rather than surprise. My mother Linda questioned why I had kept such detailed records, suggesting that my documentation proved Danny's claims about my controlling and manipulative nature. She wondered aloud whether I had been planning to use this information to force them to make decisions against their will. My father Frank acknowledged that the payments had come from my accounts, but maintained that Danny had told them most of the money originated from his side job's investment returns and cash gifts from friends who wanted to help the family. According to Danny's version of events, I had simply been the conduit for funds that actually came from his resourcefulness and networking abilities. Frank seemed to believe that I was inflating my contributions while minimizing Danny's role in securing the actual funding. When I showed them the intercepted cards containing detailed explanations of my anonymous gifts and expressions of love for them, their reaction shocked me more than anything that had happened previously. Rather than feeling grateful or apologetic for not receiving these messages, they seemed angry that I had been monitoring their mail and questioned whether I had planted the cards as evidence to support my claims about Danny's deception. My mother accused me of trying to manipulate their emotions by creating fake evidence designed to make Danny look bad, while making myself appear more generous and caring than I actually was. She suggested that my willingness to spy on their mail delivery proved that Danny had been correct about my controlling tendencies and lack of respect for their privacy and independence. The conversation escalated when I showed them printouts of Danny's text messages, where he explicitly admitted to lying about my character and taking credit for my financial contributions. Instead of recognizing these messages as proof of Danny's manipulation, my parents interpreted them as evidence that I had been secretly investigating their family communications and violating their trust by accessing private information without permission. My father expressed disappointment that I would stoop to such invasive tactics just to prove a point about money, while my mother questioned whether I had somehow manipulated or fabricated the text message screenshots to frame Danny for behavior he had not actually engaged in. They seemed more upset about my methods of gathering evidence than they were about the content of the evidence itself. The most crushing moment of the entire confrontation came when I accidentally noticed a legal document on the kitchen counter while my father went to get a glass of water. The paperwork was from a local law firm and contained preliminary information about transferring property ownership between family members. My parents had been consulting with an attorney about removing my name from the house deed and transferring full ownership to Danny. The lawyer's notes revealed that my parents believed Danny had been making all the mortgage payments and covering household expenses, while I had merely served as a co-signer to help with the initial loan approval process. They wanted to reward Danny's financial responsibility and family dedication by making him the sole owner of the property, eliminating any legal complications that might arise from having multiple names on the deed. According to the legal consultation notes, my parents viewed this ownership transfer as a simple matter of correcting an administrative oversight rather than giving away property that belonged to someone else. They had been planning to ask me to sign the necessary paperwork as a favor to help Danny establish independent homeownership and build equity for his future financial security. The document included specific language about Danny's consistent mortgage payments and his expressed desire to eventually assume full responsibility for the property as his contribution to caring for aging parents. The lawyer had advised them about gift tax implications and proper procedures for transferring ownership between family members, treating the situation as a routine family transaction rather than a complicated dispute over who actually owned and maintained the property. Reading those legal notes while my parents continued to question my motives and defend Danny's character, I realized that the damage to our family relationships extended far beyond the immediate financial deception. Danny had succeeded in completely rewriting our family history and creating an alternate reality where I played a minor supporting role, while he served as the responsible, caring son who sacrificed his own interests for the benefit of others. The legal consultation represented the culmination of months of systematic manipulation that had convinced my parents to view Danny as their financial savior and me as someone who had helped with paperwork but contributed little of real value to their security and comfort. They were prepared to sign away my property rights based on lies and fabricated evidence, never questioning whether Danny actually possessed the resources and stability necessary to maintain a house and cover ongoing expenses. Standing in that living room with legal documents proving that my own parents were planning to steal my property and give it to the son who had been systematically destroying my reputation, I felt the last remnants of family loyalty and obligation dissolve into anger and determination to protect myself from further exploitation and betrayal. Realizing that my parents had been manipulated beyond the reach of evidence or rational discussion, I decided to make one final attempt to salvage our family relationships through complete transparency and undeniable proof of the financial reality. I gathered 3 years' worth of comprehensive documentation that would make it impossible for anyone to dispute who had actually been supporting the family and maintaining their comfortable lifestyle. I spent an entire weekend organizing bank statements, canceled checks, credit card receipts, insurance policies, mortgage documents, utility bills, tax records, and every other piece of financial evidence that demonstrated my complete responsibility for their housing costs and living expenses. I created a detailed spreadsheet that showed the total amount I had contributed broken down by category and month, revealing that I had provided over $87,000 in direct support during the previous 3 years. The following Tuesday evening, I requested another family meeting and methodically presented this comprehensive financial record to my parents. I walked them through every line item, every payment, every expense that I had covered on their behalf. I showed the mortgage statements with my name as the borrower utility accounts, with my name as the responsible party insurance policies, where I appeared as the policyholder, and property tax records that listed me as the owner responsible for annual payments. I explained how my living situation had deteriorated as a direct result of supporting their household, detailing the sacrifices I had made to ensure they could live comfortably without financial stress or insecurity. I described my cramped studio apartment, my unreliable vehicle, my limited food budget, and my inability to participate in social activities because every spare dollar went toward their mortgage, utilities, groceries, and incidental expenses. Throughout this presentation, my parents listened with expressions that seemed more annoyed than grateful or apologetic. They appeared to view my detailed documentation as further evidence of my obsessive need to control the narrative and seek credit for contributions that Danny had told them were collaborative efforts funded through his resourcefulness and networking abilities. When I finished presenting the financial evidence, my father acknowledged that the payments had indeed come from my accounts, but maintained that Danny had assured them these funds represented money he had earned through various side jobs and investment activities. Frank seemed to believe that I was deliberately trying to take credit for Danny's hard work and financial sacrifices while minimizing his contributions to the family's stability and security. Danny arrived at the house during this conversation, immediately recognizing the tension in the room and quickly shifting into defensive mode. He accused me of harassing our parents with financial documents and threatening to take everything away if they did not acknowledge my superiority and express sufficient gratitude for my contributions. He portrayed my evidence as proof of my manipulative and controlling nature, rather than as legitimate documentation of actual facts. The situation reached a shocking climax when Danny produced his smartphone and began playing audio recordings of previous conversations between us. However, these recordings had been cleverly edited to remove context and combine separate statements in ways that made me sound demanding, threatening, and emotionally unstable. My expressions of hurt and frustration had been spliced together to create the impression that I regularly made ultimatums and threats related to withdrawing financial support. In one particularly damaging edited recording, my voice could be heard saying things like, "If you do not appreciate what I have done," and "I can take away everything, and you will see how much you need me when I am gone." But these phrases had been taken from different conversations and combined to sound like a single threatening monologue. The editing was sophisticated enough that my parents could not detect the manipulation, and the recording seemed to confirm everything Danny had been telling them about my true character and motivations. When I tried to explain that the recordings were edited and taken out of context, Danny accused me of gaslighting our parents and claimed that I was becoming dangerous when I did not receive the recognition and control I demanded. He suggested that my behavior was escalating and that they needed to protect themselves from my psychological manipulation and potential threats to their security. The most devastating aspect of this confrontation was watching my parents' faces as they listened to these fabricated recordings. They looked at me with fear and disappointment, seeing me as someone who had been secretly threatening and manipulating them while pretending to be generous and caring. The edited audio had perfectly supported Danny's narrative about my controlling nature and hidden agenda to use financial support as leverage for emotional manipulation. My mother expressed concern about my mental state. and suggested that I needed professional help to deal with my obvious anger and resentment toward the family. My father wondered aloud whether they should contact authorities. If I continued to harass them with demands for gratitude and recognition, they seemed to view me as a potential threat to their safety and peace of mind rather than as someone who had sacrificed his own financial security to ensure their comfort and stability. Danny had successfully transformed me from a generous, caring son into a dangerous, manipulative presence in their lives. His months of systematic character assassination had been reinforced by carefully edited evidence that appeared to prove his claims about my psychological instability and hidden agenda. My parents no longer saw me as someone who loved them enough to make significant personal sacrifices. Instead, they feared me as someone who might harm them if my demands for control and recognition were not satisfied. Walking out of that house for what I knew would be the last time as their son. Rather than just the legal owner, I realized that Danny had won his campaign to destroy my family relationships. He had successfully convinced our parents that I was the villain in our family story while positioning himself as their protector and true source of support. My years of genuine sacrifice and love had been transformed into evidence of manipulation and control through his sophisticated deception and psychological manipulation. The point of no return had been reached not because of financial disagreements or simple misunderstandings, but because my brother had deliberately and systematically destroyed the foundation of trust and love that makes family relationships possible. There was no coming back from the level of deception and betrayal that had poisoned every interaction and rewritten every memory of our shared history. The realization that my family relationships had been irreparably damaged through deliberate manipulation forced me to confront a painful truth about enabling destructive behavior through misplaced loyalty and unconditional support. I could no longer continue sacrificing my financial security and emotional well-being for people who not only failed to appreciate my efforts, but actively viewed me as a threat to their happiness and safety. That night, I made the most difficult decision of my adult life. I would stop enabling a situation that had become toxic and financially unsustainable while protecting myself from further exploitation and emotional abuse. This was not a decision motivated by anger or revenge, but rather a recognition that healthy relationships require mutual respect and honesty, neither of which existed in my current family dynamics. The following morning, I contacted my attorney to discuss the legal procedures for reclaiming full control of my property and ending my financial obligations to family members who had demonstrated complete disregard for my well-being and contributions. Since the house was purchased entirely with my funds and remained legally in my name, the process was straightforward from a legal perspective, though emotionally devastating to contemplate. My lawyer explained that as the sole owner of the property, I had the legal right to determine who could live in the house and under what conditions. She advised me to provide proper notice to my parents about changes in living arrangements and to document all communications in case legal disputes arose from my decisions. She also recommended that I secure the property and change locks to prevent unauthorized access or potential damage to my investment. I began the process of reclaiming control over my financial obligations by contacting utility companies and canceling the automatic payment arrangements that had been draining my bank account for 3 years. I called the electric company, gas company, water department, trash service, and internet provider to remove my payment authorization and explain that bills should be sent directly to the residents of the property rather than to me as an external party. The property tax office required more extensive documentation to change the billing arrangements, but I was able to provide proof of my decision to end automatic payments from my account. I arranged for future tax bills to be sent to the property address rather than my apartment, making it clear that I would no longer assume responsibility for these obligations without explicit written agreements from the residents. I contacted the insurance companies that provided coverage for both vehicles driven by my parents and explained that I would be canceling their policies at the end of the current billing cycle. I also canceled the homeowner's insurance policy that protected the property, though I arranged for a basic policy that would protect my investment as the property owner while eliminating coverage for personal belongings and liability protection for the residents. The most emotionally difficult aspect of this process was moving my few personal belongings out of storage and into the house that legally belonged to me. I had been living in a cramped studio apartment while paying for a beautiful 4-bedroom house where I was no longer welcome as a family member. The irony of the situation was not lost on me as I packed my parents' belongings and arranged for them to stay temporarily with my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, who lived about 20 minutes away. I gave my parents 48 hours notice about the change in living arrangements, providing them with enough time to pack essential belongings and make alternative housing arrangements while I sorted out the legal and financial aspects of the property ownership. I assured them that their personal belongings would be safely stored and available for pickup at their convenience, and I offered to help with moving expenses to demonstrate that my decision was based on necessity rather than vindictiveness. Danny's reaction to these developments revealed the true extent of his financial irresponsibility and the complete fabrication of his claims about contributing to household expenses. When faced with actual bills for utilities, groceries, and basic living expenses, he panicked and attempted to use credit cards that were already maxed out from his recreational spending and entertainment purchases. His claims about having investment accounts and side job income quickly crumbled under the pressure of real financial obligations. He could not produce bank statements showing the resources he had claimed to possess, and his attempts to borrow money from friends and extended family members revealed that his reputation for financial reliability was as fabricated as his contributions to our parents' household expenses. The first wave of bills arrived much sooner than any of us had anticipated. Utility companies sent disconnect notices within 10 days of my canceled payments, rather than waiting for full monthly billing cycles. The property tax office sent a notice about missed payments that could result in penalties and interest charges. Insurance companies provided notification that coverage would lapse without immediate payment, leaving both vehicles and the property unprotected against damage or liability claims. Danny's attempts to cover these expenses using personal credit revealed the extent of his financial instability and poor money management skills. His credit cards were declined when he tried to pay for basic groceries, and his attempts to establish new utility accounts were rejected due to poor credit history and lack of verifiable income sources. The carefully constructed narrative about his financial responsibility collapsed within days of facing actual monetary obligations. My parents found themselves staying with my Aunt Patricia in her small 2-bedroom apartment, struggling to understand how their comfortable living situation had deteriorated so rapidly. They had never been directly involved in paying household bills or managing property-related expenses, so they were unprepared for the complexity and cost of maintaining independent housing without external financial support. The reality of their situation began to contradict everything Danny had told them about his ability to provide financial security and stability for the family. His lies about having resources and connections started to unravel as he proved incapable of covering even basic monthly expenses that I had been handling automatically for 3 years without complaint or recognition. The consequences of my decision to stop enabling my family's financial dependence accelerated much faster than anyone had anticipated. Within 4 days of my cutting off payments and reclaiming my property, the carefully constructed house of lies that Danny had built began to collapse under the weight of undeniable financial reality. My parents found themselves crowded into my Aunt Patricia's small apartment, sharing a fold-out sofa bed and struggling to understand how their secure living situation had transformed into temporary homelessness so quickly. Danny had promised them that he could handle all the household expenses and maintain their comfortable lifestyle, but his complete inability to cover even basic utilities exposed the fraudulent nature of his previous claims about financial responsibility and family support. The utility companies moved swiftly to disconnect services when Danny's credit card payments were declined. The electricity was shut off first, followed by gas service, and then water, leaving the beautiful house I had purchased dark, cold, and uninhabitable. Danny's frantic attempts to establish new accounts in his name were rejected due to poor credit history and his inability to provide proof of sufficient income to guarantee monthly payments. His claims about having investment accounts, side job income, and networking connections that could provide financial resources proved to be complete fabrications when faced with real bills that required immediate payment. The friends who supposedly owed him money from various business deals were either non-existent or unable to provide the substantial funds needed to restore household services and maintain ongoing expenses. The final twist that exposed the complete scope of Danny's deception came from an entirely unexpected source. Sarah Martinez, Danny's ex-girlfriend from his community college years, contacted me through social media after hearing about our family situation through mutual friends. She had broken up with Danny 6 months earlier when she discovered his pattern of lying about money and relationships, and she wanted to share information that would finally reveal the truth about his character and behavior. Sarah provided screenshots of text message conversations where Danny had bragged extensively about his elaborate scheme to manipulate our parents into believing he was supporting them financially while I did all the actual work. In these messages, he described me as a sucker who was too weak and desperate for family approval to stand up for himself when someone else took credit for his contributions. He had laughed about how easy it was to convince our parents that his lies were true, while my genuine generosity went unrecognized and unappreciated. The text messages revealed Danny's complete lack of empathy or guilt about his manipulation tactics. He had described his systematic character assassination campaign as a game that he was winning through superior psychology and strategic thinking. He mocked my emotional investment in family relationships and expressed confidence that he could eventually convince our parents to transfer the house ownership to him as a reward for his supposed financial dedication and family loyalty. Sarah explained that she was sharing this information because Danny had recently dumped her for another woman, and she wanted him to face consequences for his manipulative and dishonest behavior. She had witnessed his lies about money, his exploitation of family relationships, and his complete disregard for other people's feelings and welfare. Her decision to expose his deception was motivated partly by revenge, but also by a genuine belief that my parents deserved to know the truth about their son's character. When I showed these text message screenshots to my parents, combined with the undeniable evidence of Danny's inability to cover basic household expenses, they finally began to see through the elaborate deception that had poisoned our family relationships for months. The contrast between Danny's boastful claims in the messages and his complete financial helplessness in reality made it impossible to maintain their belief in his fabricated narratives. My father Frank broke down emotionally as he realized how thoroughly he had been manipulated and how badly he had misjudged both of his sons. He admitted that his shame about losing his job at the manufacturing plant had made him desperate to believe that Danny was the successful, responsible son who could provide security and stability for the family. His pride had prevented him from acknowledging the extent of his dependence on my financial support, and his guilt about being unable to support his family had made him vulnerable to Danny's lies about alternative sources of help. My mother Linda tearfully acknowledged that her favoritism toward Danny had been based on worry about his future rather than appreciation for his contributions. She had been so concerned about his lack of direction and stability that she convinced herself to believe his stories about financial success and family dedication. Her maternal instincts to protect and defend him had blinded her to the reality of his deceptive and manipulative behavior. The revelation of the truth forced Danny to confront consequences that extended beyond the loss of his family's trust and admiration. His fabricated claims about having substantial income from investments and side jobs had attracted the attention of the Internal Revenue Service when he failed to file tax returns that reflected the resources he had claimed to possess. His lies about financial success created legal complications when government agencies began investigating the discrepancy between his reported income and his supposed ability to support an entire household. The psychological pressure of maintaining elaborate lies while facing real financial obligations finally pushed Danny to seek professional help for underlying emotional and behavioral problems that had driven his deceptive patterns. The collapse of his carefully constructed false identity forced him to confront his own insecurities, jealousy, and need for approval that had motivated his campaign to destroy my family relationships. My parents agreed to participate in family counseling to address the years of dysfunction, miscommunication, and manipulation that had damaged our relationships. The therapy process was slow and often painful as we worked through patterns of favoritism, enabling behavior and dishonest communication that had created fertile ground for Danny's manipulation to succeed. I made the decision to move back into my studio apartment while maintaining legal ownership of the house my parents had been living in. After extensive family discussions and counseling sessions, we reached a written agreement where my parents could return to live in the house while assuming responsibility for property taxes, utilities, and basic maintenance costs. I continued to cover the mortgage payments, but the arrangement included clear boundaries and expectations that protected my financial interests while allowing them to maintain stable housing. Danny moved out of the family home and began the difficult process of rebuilding his life based on honesty rather than deception. He found employment at a warehouse facility where his work performance was measured by objective standards rather than his ability to manipulate interpersonal relationships. The job required him to support himself independently and learn genuine responsibility without the safety net of family financial support that he had exploited for years. The resolution of our family crisis taught me valuable lessons about the difference between generous support and enabling destructive behavior. True generosity involves helping people become more independent and capable, not creating dependence that prevents personal growth and responsibility. Healthy family relationships require mutual respect, honest communication, and appreciation for each person's contributions, not blind loyalty that ignores harmful patterns of manipulation and exploitation. I began dating again and pursuing personal interests that I had neglected during the years of financial sacrifice for my family. I started saving money for my own future goals, including eventual home ownership, travel opportunities, and career development that would improve my long-term financial security and personal satisfaction. Setting healthy boundaries with my family allowed me to maintain loving relationships while protecting myself from further exploitation. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving action you can take for family members is to stop enabling their dysfunction and force them to confront the consequences of their choices. My decision to reclaim my property and end automatic financial support was not punishment or revenge, but rather a necessary step toward restoring honest relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. What would you do if you discovered that your own family had been systematically lying about your contributions and taking credit for your sacrifices? Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to stop helping someone you love? Because your support was being exploited rather than appreciated. I hope sharing my story helps others recognize the difference between healthy family support and enabling destructive behavior. Remember that you deserve relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine appreciation for who you are and what you contribute. Sometimes protecting yourself from exploitation is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of setting healthy boundaries in family relationships. Your comments about your own experiences with family challenges and relationship boundaries help create a supportive community where people can learn from each other's struggles and victories. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that values honest communication, personal growth, and the courage to make difficult decisions when relationships become toxic or exploitative. May you find the strength to protect your own well being while maintaining love and compassion for the people who matter most in your life.